Folks in Clearwater County still remembered the winter when Mrs. Carson carried her twins beneath her heart. The Turner Ranch lay 5 miles east of town, sprawled across rolling grass and cottonwoods that bent toward the creek. It was a rich man's land, fertile soil, strong cattle, and a house big enough to echo every sound. Gus Turner had built his fortune over 20 years, one hard bargain and one new fence line at a time. To his neighbors, he was a man carved from stone, steady, shrewd, stubborn as a mule. But inside the walls of that house, fear had begun to grow in him like rot. The fear started the day a wandering fortune-teller rode into Clearwater. He was an old drifter with a wool coat frayed at the cuffs and silver rings stacked on his fingers. Nobody paid him much mind at first, just another man chasing shelter from the cold. Yet Gus, who believed signs and omens more than he admitted, invited the old man inside for a cup of hot coffee and a reading. Just to humor his wife, the fortune-teller's cloudy eyes fixed on Gus, and he spoke in a voice too calm for the storm gathering outside. "Twins," he murmured, touching the palm he had just read. "Twins will be your undoing. One child brings fortune, the other will carry ruin. The land will sour, and your house will fall." Gus laughed at first, a thin, forced laugh, but the worry in his brow betrayed him. The old man rode out before dusk, leaving nothing behind but a shaken household and the faint smell of tobacco. Gus's wife May dismissed the superstition as foolish talk. But Gus was not a man who let fear go once it clamped its jaws around him, and fear drove him quietly, steadily toward madness. As May's belly swelled through the fall months, Gus grew restless. He tightened his grip on the ranch, snapped at his hired hands, barked at his foreman. At night, May heard him pacing the hall, muttering to himself about ruined fortunes and omens cast. When December winds pushed ice down from the northern mountains, May knew she would soon give birth, and she dreaded the look she saw in her husband's eyes. The night the twins came was bitter cold. Snow piled knee-deep around the porch steps, and the midwife rode through drifts with a lantern bobbing at her side. Inside the big house breathed heat and worry. May labored for hours, gripping the sheets, her skin slick with sweat, though the air carried the sharpness of winter. Gus stood near the door, his jaw clenched, his eyes darting like a cornered animal. Just after midnight, the first child arrived, a beautiful girl with a strong cry and wide blue eyes. The midwife placed her in May's trembling arms. They named her Maggie, but the second child came harder. May cried out, pushing through a wave of pain that nearly drowned her. The room swayed, lantern shadows stretching like long fingers along the walls. At last the baby slipped free, smaller than her sister, her cry faint and thin as a reed whistle. May reached for her at once. "Paley," she whispered. The name came like a prayer. The midwife stepped away to wash her hands. In that sliver of time, Gus strode forward, shutting the door behind her. His face had gone pale as bone. "May," he said, voice low, strained. "You know what must be done." May stared at him, blinking through exhaustion. "No, Gus, she's our child." He seized her wrist and shoved a knife toward her trembling hand. "One of them will destroy us." The fortune-teller was clear. "You want this house to fall. You want the land to wither. Do it." May recoiled, horror flooding her face. "I will not harm my own child." Gus's voice climbed, brittle as dry wood. "Do it, May, before ruin finds us." He pressed the knife closer. May pulled back, shielding the newborn with her body. The struggle began small, a tug of the wrist, a plea. But fear is a terrible fuel, and Gus was burning fast. The knife glinted as they fought, the steel catching the lantern light. In the scuffle, the blade slipped. A sharp cry split the air, thin, pained. A crimson line opened across baby Lila's cheek. May froze. The wound was small, but the sight of her daughter's blood seemed to snap something inside her. Rage flowed through her tired limbs. She lunged, pushing Gus away with all the strength left in her. "You monster!" she screamed. Their struggle turned desperate. The knife twisted between their hands. May slipped on the blood-spotted floor just enough for Gus's weight to pitch forward. The blade plunged downward, A soft gasp escaped May's lips. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor beside the cradle, her hands smearing red across the wooden boards. Gus staggered back, chest heaving. "May, May." But the words would not come. The deed was done. Moments later, the midwife pushed the door open, sensing the commotion. Gus shouted that May had taken her own life, his voice reaching in just the right places to sell the lie. The midwife froze at the sight of blood on the floorboards, the knife near May's still hand. Gus Turner shook like a man undone. It was enough to silence any doubts. Days later, the town accepted the story. Childbirth grief, exhaustion. A mother broken by fear. No one questioned Gus Turner, the man of wealth, the man of land. But inside the Turner house, something darker had begun. Gus, haunted by the accident he dared not admit, grew cold as desert stone. He doted on Maggie as if she were spun from gold. And Lila, the child with the faint scar and the soft cry, became in his eyes the omen the fortune-teller had promised. He could not kill her, but he could see her. And so Lila grew up beneath a veil, taught to believe she was born a curse, out in the barns beneath a sky that stretched wider than sorrow. A tiny sob, 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 sob of a tiny new life struggled forward, unwanted by her father, unseen by anyone but her sister. The West was full of orphans of fate. Lila Turner did not yet know she was one of them. Nor did she know her path would one day cross with a quiet Apache man named Jace Hawk, who carried scars of his own. But destiny in the West moves like dust on the wind, silent, steady, and always toward those who need it most. Spring came slow to Clearwater County, creeping across the plains in pale greens and soft breezes that carried the scent of thawed earth. Snowmelt rolled down from the northern hills, filling the gullies and coaxing new life from brittle stems. On the Turner ranch, the cattle grew restless and the fences leaned from winter's weight. Work piled high, and Gus hired extra hands, men who needed coin, men who didn't ask questions, men whose backs could bear the strain of ranch life. But one worker stood apart the moment he arrived. His name was Jace, a young Apache man with eyes like a boy's and a posture shaped by long years of surviving on land that refused to love anyone easily. He was not tall, but he carried himself with the steadiness of a man who understood the way winds traveled and how horses breathed. His hair was tied back in a loose knot, and he spoke only when addressed, never in haste, never with fear. Most of the ranch hands regarded him with a mix of suspicion and thinly veiled contempt. Folks in Clearwater weren't kind to natives. They treated Jace as if he were carved from something lesser, something feral. Yet he took every insult like a man might take a passing storm, standing still, letting it move around him. Jace had come because he had no choice. His uncle had taken in 3 orphaned children, after a fever swept through their camp. With extra mouths to feed and winter stores running low, Jace left the reservation to earn money. His uncle had warned him that white ranchers paid poorly and trusted less. But Jace said he would endure what he must. Truth was, he had endured far worse. Gus assigned him to the barns tending horses and clearing winter debris. Jace took to the work with a calm patience that surprised even the most seasoned hands. Horses responded to him as if they understood he belonged somewhere deeper than the fences that trapped them. In the dim hours of dawn or the fading light of dusk, one could find Jace brushing coats, checking hooves, or humming low songs his mother once sang. It was in those same barns that Lila often hid from the world. She would slip out before the house stirred, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders. The familiar veil tied over her cheek and jaw. The veil was thin enough to let her breathe, but thick enough to hide the scar that had become her life's shadow. The scar had healed over the years, fading from deep red to a soft pale line. But to Gus, it was permanent proof of her curse. Whenever Lila stepped into the barn, the horses nickered and welcomed her. They liked Jace judged by heart rather than face. There was one mare in particular, a small chestnut named Lydia, who seemed glued to Lila's side. Lydia would nuzzle the girl with soft insistence, and Lila often rested her forehead against the mare's warm neck, drawing steadiness from her. She thought her visits to the barn went unnoticed. Jace knew otherwise. He first saw Lila remove her veil one quiet evening near sundown. She believed herself alone, humming a soft tune as she smoothed Lydia's mane. Lila's hands were elegant despite years of work pressed on her by a father who wished she'd never been born. Her eyes were gentle, and even without the veil, she did not look monstrous, only fragile, only human. When she turned and caught sight of Jace in the shadows, her breath stumbled. Her hand flew toward her cheek. Shame flushed her skin. But Jace, without a word, turned away, not in disgust, not in pity, just out of respect. That single gesture lodged somewhere deep inside Lila, like an ember she hadn't known she needed. From then on, they shared small moments, not conversations, just acknowledgments. A nod in the morning, a soft good evening, when she passed by, the kind of moments that stitched two lonely souls into a quiet understanding. But the ranch hands noticed, and ranch hands loved to talk. Before long, whispers ran up and down the bunkhouse that Apache's got a liking for the veiled girl. Seen him together more than once. Maybe that's why she hides her face, lost her senses over a red man. Their words grew crueler as they spread. Lila, of course, heard them first. Her cheeks burned beneath the veil every time she walked through the yard. People stared longer, snickered. Pity followed her like a shadow. Lila began avoiding the porch steps, avoiding the barn when the hands were around. But Lydia needed her, so she still slipped out at night. Those hours became her only refuge. One evening, she found Jace repairing a broken saddle strap. He looked up as she approached, and she froze, caught between shame and wanting to speak. He saved her by lowering his eyes back to the strap. "Evening, Miss Lila," he said softly. She swallowed. "Good. Good evening, Jace." It was the most they had ever spoken. But something shifted between the two. Jace saw the pain she carried, not from a scar, but from a lifetime of being treated as less than whole. And Lila saw something in him, too. A man who bore the weight of lost land, lost people, and prejudice, sharpened into days like a wet stone. Two outcasts standing under the same roof. Lila began to look forward to those brief exchanges. She found herself glancing toward the barns, more often hoping for a glimpse of him. But each time she felt her heart rise, guilt followed like dust. He's kind because he's kind to everyone, she told herself. Do not hope for more. Jace, for his part, kept his distance. Not from indifference, but because he understood how dangerous a whisper could become for a woman already carrying the weight of a family superstition. Still, something unspoken, fragile as a thread of morning mist, grew between them. And that was all it took for the rumors to reach Gus Turner. When Gus first heard that his unfortunate daughter had been seen in the company of an Apache, his face lit not with anger but with cruel satisfaction, because to him the rumors sounded like deliverance. A way to rid himself of the girl he blamed for everything. A way to chase his ghosts away. And that decision would change all their lives. Rumors travel fast across prairie grass. Faster still among ranch hands with little else to occupy their evenings. By the time the sun rose over the Turner ranch the next morning, Gus already knew every crooked detail of the story, embellished, twisted, stretched like rawhide left in the sun. They said Lila lingered too long in the barns. That she sought out the Apache man with shy smiles. That she let him touch her hand while the horses slept. None of it was true, but it did not matter. To Gus Turner, the tale was a gift. He sat behind his broad oak desk that morning, boots planted firm on the plank floor, tapping a knuckle against the wood as he considered the matter. Outside his office window, the yard was waking, men leading horses to pasture, the cook ringing the iron triangle for breakfast dust, rising as the day warmed. But Gus saw none of it. His mind was fixed on what he believed to be a perfect opportunity. If Lila was tainted by rumor, he could be rid of her without guilt. If she was wed to a man of low standing, no respectable soul would question her absence afterward. If trouble befell her in that marriage, well, that was her fate, wasn't it? The thought eased Gus's anxiety like whiskey sliding warm into the gut. He summoned Jace before noon. Jace arrived at the big house with dust on his boots and the faint smell of saddle oil clinging to his shirt. Two ranch hands nudged one another as he passed, some grinning, some pitying. He ignored them all, knocked once on the doorframe of Gus's study, and stepped inside when called. Gus did not offer him a seat. He folded his arms, his gaze sharp and cold. "I hear you've been spending time with my daughter." Jace held steady. "I tend the barn, sir." "Your daughter visits the horses. Don't toy with me." Gus's voice cracked like a whip. "Your kind always has a scheme, always looking for a way in through pity or charm, but I'll spare you the lies." Jace felt no anger, only the familiar sting of a wound long healed, but easily reopened. Gus leaned forward. "You will marry Lila. Today if needed, or you'll be off my land before the sun sets." Silence settled heavy as dust. Jace blinked in slow and calm. He had expected trouble, but not this. "I did not court her," he said quietly. "You don't need to. You only need to take her." Jace's jaw tightened. Gus continued, voice low and triumphant. "You're a nobody boy. A stray. If I let you go, you won't find work within 50 miles. I'll see to that myself." The words carried the weight of truth. White ranchers in Clearwater County spoke to one another the way old women knit tight, tangled, and impossible to pull apart. If Gus blacklisted Jace, no one would hire him. And without work, his uncle's family would starve before winter. Jace felt the walls closing like a trap. Gus twisted the knife further. "If you marry her, you keep your wages and your bunk. And I don't care what becomes of the girl after." It was then Jace understood. Gus Turner wasn't arranging a marriage. He was discarding his daughter. Jace studied the man before him, seeing the ugliness behind his wealth, the fear clinging to his bones like mold. And in that moment, Jace remembered a different face. Lila's face framed by lamplight in the barn, her veil slipping as she whispered comfort to a horse that adored her. A girl convinced she brought misfortune simply by existing. He thought of her eyes when she believed herself alone. Sad, yes, but something else too. A quiet courage, a stubborn will to keep breathing in a world that didn't want her. When Jace finally spoke, his voice was steady. "If she wants my hand, I'll offer it." Gus's brows snapped together. "That isn't what I asked you. It's the only answer I have." Gus scowled, not understanding this kind of refusal. But Jace had made his choice. Word of the ultimatum spread through the house like lightning on dry brush. Maggie heard it while drying dishes in the kitchen. She stormed out, apron still tied, and found Jace walking back toward the barns. Her steps were sharp, her breath high in her chest. "Jace," she called, and he turned. Maggie marched straight up to him, eyes blazing with protective fury. "What have you done?" Jace stood still beneath her fire. "Your father made an offer." "I accepted on one condition. A marriage isn't an offer. It's a sentence," she cried. "Why would you agree to such a thing? Why would you let him use you like this?" Jace looked past her shoulder toward the house. "This isn't about what your father wants. It's about your sister." Maggie shook her head. "Lila doesn't even know you. You've exchanged what, a handful of words." Jace's reply came gentle, almost mournful. "I know what it is to be treated as less, to be feared or hidden. I won't let her bear that alone." Maggie swallowed. The anger in her face softened, replaced by a grief she'd carried for years but never named. "I don't want her hurt," she whispered. "She's been hurt enough." Jace nodded. "Then let her choose." Maggie blinked. "Choose it. If she says no, I walk away." Maggie stared at him for a long moment. She had met many men, ranchers, ranch hands, drifters passing through town. None spoke like this. None showed Lila the plain dignity she'd been denied her whole life. Maggie exhaled slowly. "You're a better man than my father deserves to know." Jace didn't smile, but something softened in his eyes. That night, Lila sensed the tension before a single word reached her ears. Maggie hovered close, anxious as a bird guarding a broken wing. Gus stalked through the halls with the stiff posture of a man who believed he had secured victory. And Jace waited in the barn's hands tucked in his pockets, gazing at the horses for comfort while the wind whispered across the rafters. None of them knew yet that the decision made that day would unravel truths buried for nearly 2 decades. For now, all that mattered was this. Gus had set the stage for a cruel and calculated marriage. Jace had given Lila the right to choose. And Lila's life until now, confined to whispers, shadows, and silk veils, was about to change forever. The night settled over the Turner ranch like a heavy quilt thick with unease. Lanterns glowed behind the windows of the big house, shadows shifting inside as the sisters spoke behind closed doors. Down in the barns, Jace moved quietly among the horses, brushing their coats, checking the latches twice, though he'd already checked them a dozen times. He couldn't calm his own unsettled thoughts, so he tried to soothe the animals instead. Lila had not yet been told of Gus's ultimatum. She would hear it soon. Jace felt the weight of that truth pressing against his ribs. He didn't regret agreeing to the arrangement, not exactly. But he regretted that she'd been thrust into the storm with no say. He had promised Maggie she could choose. Now he feared more than anything what that choice might be. Inside the house, Maggie paced the small parlor where Lila often read by lamplight. The walls were lined with family portraits, paintings in which Gus's features were stern. May's eyes were kind, and 2 empty spaces remained where the twins should have been painted together. But May had died before the girls were old enough for portraits, and Gus refused to hang a likeness of Lila at all. Lila sat on the edge of the sofa veil in place, Maggie's hands clasped tight in her lap. She felt her sister's tension before Maggie spoke. "Lila, I need you to listen." The tone made Lila stiffen. "Is it, Father?" Maggie took a breath. "He's decided to marry you off." The words cut deeper than expected. Lila blinked, her voice thin. "Marry me?" To whom Maggie hesitated. Lila felt a hesitation like a cold dread. To Jace, the room seemed to tilt. Lila's pulse pounded in her ears. Jace, the Apache, man with the steady gaze and the careful hands. The man who never mocked her, never stared too long, never treated her like a burden. If her father had chosen any other ranch hand, Lila might have accepted the humiliation as she'd accepted everything else. But Jace, that changed things. "Why?" she whispered. Maggie's jaw tightened. "Because rumors started lies, and your father sees them as an excuse to push you out." Lila's breath trembled. Her father's hatred was nothing new, but it still burned like acid every time it touched her. "He wants me gone," she murmured. "He wants you disposed of." Maggie corrected her voice, breaking with anger. "He thinks Jace will take you far away, or that something unfortunate might happen." Lila lowered her gaze. She had lived long enough under Gus's roof to understand the unspoken words. Her father wasn't planning a future for her. He was planning an erasure. Maggie knelt beside her, gripping her hands. "But listen to me. Jace isn't like the others." "When your father forced the proposal on him," Maggie's voice softened, He said you should choose. Only you." Lila's throat tightened as she searched her sister's face for deception. There was none. He said that Lila whispered something warm, flickering beneath her ribs, something she'd felt only in the quiet of the barn when Jace nodded to her in passing. But just as quickly, fear smothered it. "Maggie," she whispered, "I cannot marry him. I can barely speak to him." Maggie squeezed her hands. "Then tell him that. He'll accept it, but he deserves to hear it from you." Lila nodded faintly. After a long pause, she rose. "Take me to him." The moon hung low over the barn, round and pale as a coin. Jace stood outside the double doors, arms folded, looking up at the skies, as if searching for answers written in starlight. When he heard footsteps, he turned. Maggie approached first. Lila followed her, slow but determined. Jace straightened immediately, removing his hat in respect. "Miss Maggie," then with gentler reverence, "Miss Lila." Lila swallowed, her voice barely audible. "Jace!" May we speak alone? Maggie nodded and stepped back, though her worried eyes never quite left them. Jace led Lila into the barn, where lantern light cast long shadows across the stalls. Lydia nickered softly in greeting, sensing Lila's distress. Lila stood near the mare, fingers brushing the wooden railing. My sister told me what father demanded. Jace nodded once. I will not lie to you. He meant it as a threat, not a blessing. Lila's eyes lifted slightly behind the veil. And you... Why did you agree? Jace let out a breath long and honest. Because I know what it is to be treated as less. And I saw someone who's lived her life the same way. Lila's pulse fluttered. You barely know me. I know enough. Silence spread between them like a wide prairie field, empty open, waiting for something to grow. Jace continued, his voice low. If you refuse, I walk away. You won't owe me anything, but I will not take part in your father's cruelty, not unless you choose your own path. Lila felt her throat close. For the first time in her life, someone had placed her choice in her own hands. Not her father, not the servants, not even Maggie. Jace. She reached up, hesitated, then slowly untied her veil. The fabric fell away from her scar. The lantern light revealed the pale line running from cheekbone to jaw, a mark born from fear, not fate. Jace's gaze was steady, not startled, not pitying, simply listening. Lila whispered, Have you heard the things they say about me? Rumors come from cowards, Jace replied. Scars come from surviving. The words struck her like a warm wind through a winter coat. Lila felt something shift deep inside, a loosening of a knot she had carried since childhood. But before she could speak again, a noise scraped along the far side of the barn. Jace tensed, turning toward the shadows. Lila caught her breath, a boot step, a whispered voice. Then another. Jace's hand shot up, motioning Lila back toward Lydia. 3 men emerged from the darkness, rough-faced ranch hands loyal to Gus, whiskey on their breath and anger simmering in their eyes. Well, now, once lured, looks like the savage and the cursed girl are having themselves a little meeting. Jace stepped forward, shielding Lila with his body. Lila felt dread coil in her stomach. Because tonight was not only the night she revealed her face, it was also the night Gus moved against truths he feared would surface. And the danger creeping out of the darkness was only the beginning. The 3 men stepped into the lantern glow, Jake Malone red-faced and sour with liquor. Roy Stroud, tall as a fence post and just as stiff-brained. And young Eli Pike, barely 20 but already mean in the way small men often were when they sought approval from uglier hearts. They fanned out, slowly circling Jace and Lila, like coyotes testing a wounded calf. Jake Malone spat on the floorboards. Boss says the Apache's getting too bold sneaking around with his daughter, shameful business. Jace didn't rise to the bait. He simply shifted his stance, placing himself solidly between Lila and the intruders. This isn't about her, Jace said calmly. Leave now, and there won't be any trouble. Jake laughed, a sound like a rusty hinge. Oh, there's trouble, all right. Mr. Turner don't like men poking at his secrets once you've gone and opened that mouth of yours. Lila felt the air around her tighten like a noose. Gus wasn't just trying to force her into marriage. He was trying to silence the one man who'd overheard the truth. Roy Stroud cracked his knuckles. Boss said to make sure the Apache don't see sunrise. Eli Pike nodded, his face pale beneath bravado. Just business, nothing personal. Jace's jaw set. What your boss wants doesn't matter to me. The first man lunged. Jace moved fast, faster than Lila had ever seen. Years of surviving raids, of running from cavalry patrols, of hunting in the mountains, those instincts rose like a storm. Jake swung wildly. Jace ducked and drove his fist into Jake's ribs. The man wheezed and crumpled. Roy rushed next, grabbing a pitchfork from the wall. Jace kicked the handle, knocking it free, and they collided in a tangle of fists and dust. Eli hesitated. His eyes darted between Lila and the chaos. Lila stepped back toward Lydia, her heart pounding. She knew Jace could hold his own. He fought with purpose, not theories, but 2 men were still too many. And there was something else, a crack in the boards behind her. A secret rehearsed by fear. Lila grabbed the lantern from the wall and held it high. "Stop!" she cried. The word trembled but did not break. The men turned toward her. Her veil was gone. Her scar was visible. Eli Pike breathed out sharply, not in disgust, but in surprise. He wasn't expecting the girl under the rumor. "Leave him," Lila said, her voice tight. "Father sent you. I know it. But you won't touch him again." Jake, coughing on the floor, laughed weakly. "Girl, you ain't in any place to tell us." But then Maggie burst through the barn door, breathless, eyes wide. "Lila, Jace." She looked from Jake to Roy to Eli, then back at her sister. "We need to leave now." Lila's pulse jolted. "What happened?" Maggie grabbed Lila's arm. "Father's in a rage. He knows someone overheard the truth. He's trying to set this whole ranch against Jace. And if he can't kill him with his hands, he'll do it with lies." Jace stood, chest heaving, but calmness returning to his eyes. "Then we take the truth to those who can't ignore it." Maggie nodded. "I've already sent word. The Reverend will come. Sheriff, too. They'll be here at first light. They think Father is forcing a marriage your sister didn't choose." Lila swallowed hard. So the moment was coming. The moment she had spent her life avoiding, to stand in daylight, to speak aloud, to be seen. The night crept on for hours that felt like years. Jace tied up the 3 ranch hands in the tack room using the same rope they'd meant to use on him. Lila and Maggie prepared the parlor, gathering what little evidence they had. May's journal, pages, the blood-marked handkerchief the midwife had secretly tucked away and given to Maggie years later, and the old knife the house's elder servant had finally surrendered when confronted by Lila's steady insistence. By dawn, half the household knew something was wrong. Doors cracked open, whispers flowed like creek water. A few of the older helpers who remembered that bloody night years ago gathered quietly outside the parlor, heads heavy with secrets they'd carried too long. When the Reverend arrived with his Bible and weary eyes, Maggie greeted him first. "Reverend, thank you for coming." He looked past her, seeing Lila without her veil for the first time. His breath caught not at the scar's sight, but at the meaning behind it. "Child," he murmured, pain filling his voice. "They lied to you." Sheriff Clay followed, broad-shouldered, practical. A man, not easily fooled. He tipped his hat to Lila. "Miss, I reckon there's a truth that needs hearing today." Lila nodded, her hands trembling, but her voice steady. "Yes, sir, and I am ready." When Gus Turner entered the parlor, he found the Reverend, the sheriff, his daughter Jace, and a half-circle of ranch workers watching him with guarded faces. For the first time in his life, Gus Turner looked like a man cornered. He forced a smile. "What's all this? Some sort of dawn meeting?" Jace stepped aside, revealing the knife. Lila held May's journal close to her chest. Maggie spoke first. "Father, we know what happened the night Mother died." Gus's smile cracked. "Nonsense." But the sheriff's voice cut through the lie. "Then you won't mind us hearing what your staff has to say." One by one, the old workers came forward, hands shaking, voices low. Truth. Breaking free after years spent locked in haunted silence. The elder servant's confession trembled through the room. "I saw the struggle. I saw the blade. I saw Miss May fall." Gus's face turned gray. Lila stepped forward, then not hiding, not trembling. "Father," she said softly, "you blamed me for a scar you carved yourself. You hid me because you feared your own sin." He glared at her, eyes wild. "You were the curse." "No," Lila whispered. "Mother died protecting me from you." The words shattered something in Gus. He lunged, reaching for his gun. Jace moved instantly. So did the sheriff. A shot rang out, ricocheting through the parlor, slamming into the floorboards. Gus staggered. Blood bloomed along his leg as he collapsed, groaning. The sheriff bent, cuffs ready. Gus Turner, you're under arrest for assault, coercion, and obstruction in a death long concealed." As Gus was dragged away, Lila didn't flinch. Her veil lay folded on a chair. Her scar shone pale in the morning light. She stood tall and hidden at last as truth freed her from a lifetime of shadows. But the story wasn't finished. One more step remained to decide what she would do with the life that had finally been returned to her. The dust from Gus Turner's arrest had not yet settled when the sun climbed high enough to spill gold across the ranch yard. The big house felt hollow, as if its walls were exhaling years of secrets all at once. Workers gathered in small clusters, speaking in hushed tones. Some shook their heads, some crossed themselves, and some, those who had long feared the truth, finally let relief soften their faces. Lila kept to the porch, the morning air cool against a sun-kissed cheek. For the first time in her life, she felt the warmth of daylight on bare skin without fear. No veil, no shadows, just the gentle breeze stirring loose strands of her hair. She expected to feel exposed. Instead, she felt free. Maggie stepped outside with 2 mugs of coffee, handed one to her sister, and sank beside her on the step. The sisters sat in silence for a moment, listening to the distant lowing of cattle and the soft clatter of horse tack from the barns. "How are you holding up?" Maggie asked. Lila stared at the field stretching toward the horizon. "I feel like I'm standing in a doorway I never knew existed." Maggie nodded. "Whatever you choose now, it's yours to choose." That truth settled deep in Lila's heart. Her life, once dictated by fear, superstition, and cruelty, suddenly belonged to her. It was too big a realization to grasp all at once. Jace approached, then slow and respectful. He paused a few yards away, waiting for permission to draw closer. Lila lifted her gaze and nodded gently. He stepped onto the porch, hat in hand. "Miss Lila," he said softly, "I came to see how you fared." Her lips curved with a fragile, uncertain smile. "I'm better than I thought I'd be." Maggie rose, her eyes warm but protective. "I'll give you 2 a moment." She squeezed Lila's shoulder before turning toward the house. Lila and Jace sat together in the quiet of early morning. "You were brave in there," Jace said. "No," Lila answered. "I was tired of being afraid." She turned to look at him fully. "You gave me the first choice I've ever had, and now I have another." Jace lowered his gaze, giving her time. "If you want a life without me in it," he murmured, "just say the word. You owe me nothing, not even gratitude." Lila exhaled a sound halfway between relief and ache. "You stood by me when you didn't have to," she said. "You spoke to me like someone worth speaking to. You never looked at my scar as a curse." She reached up, touching the pale line along her cheek. "You were the first person not to see it as a mark of shame." And Jace looked up then, and in his eyes she saw the same quiet strength she'd clung to in the chaos of the last few days. "Lila," he said, voice steady, "I can promise honesty, patience, and a life without hiding, but I won't promise what isn't mine to decide." Her breath tightened. "And what's that?" "Love," he answered softly. "Not until you want it freely." Lila felt her throat close, not in pain, but in something tender, something so new it frightened her, almost as much as it thrilled her. "Walk with me," she whispered. They left the porch and crossed the yard. The grass was still wet with morning dew, sparkling like tiny glass beads scattered along the earth. They walked all the way to the far fence line where the land dipped gently toward the creek. Lila stopped. "I don't want to live in that house anymore," she said, glancing back at the tall silhouette of the Turner home. "It was never home to me, not really." Jace followed her gaze. "Where do you want to go?" Lila swept her eyes across the rolling land, the hills, the trees, the distant shimmer of the water. "Someplace I can breathe. Someplace quiet. Someplace where I'm not the cursed daughter of Gus Turner." Jace nodded. There's land south of here, he said, close to the reservation, close to the river. It's good land, peaceful. Lila's fingers curled lightly at her sides. Would you take me there? Jace hesitated, only long enough to make sure she meant it. Yes, he said, but only if you walk beside me, not behind. A soft laugh caught in Lila's throat. I'd like that. It took weeks to put affairs in order. Gus, now awaiting trial, had no claim left to the ranch. Maggie became the legal heir. Without hesitation, she sold off the property, paid fair wages to every ranch hand who had suffered under Gus's rule, and passed a portion of the land back to the local Apache families whose ground had been taken decades earlier. When the day came for Lila to leave, Maggie hugged her long and hard. Write to me, she said. Lila smiled every week. Jace loaded the wagon, then offered his hand to Lila. She took it, without fear. The journey south was gentle, slow healing, and when they finally found the small valley Jace had spoken of, where the creek whispered against the pebbles and the cottonwoods leaned like old friends, Lila felt her chest lift with something like wonder. This is it, she said. Home. Jace agreed. Together they built a modest cabin, wood plank by wood plank. Lila learned the names of prairie herbs, and Jace learned the cadence of her laughter. The veil remained folded in a small cedar box beneath her bed, untouched. Some evenings, Maggie rode down from Clearwater to visit. She always found Lila by the water's edge, Jace a few steps away. Their lives were woven together like threads of the same cloth. On one such evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lila turned to her sister. I used to think I was born from a curse, she said quietly. Maggie brushed a strand of hair behind Lila's ear and whispered, No, you were born from mother's courage, and you lived because you were meant to stay. Lila's eyes softened. I think, she said, glancing toward Jace, I finally found the life she wanted for me. And as dusk wrapped the valley in warm, purple light, the river whispering its endless song, Lila understood at last. She was not the ruin in anyone's prophecy. She was the beginning of her own.